Good morning, everybody. This is the Men's Sunday School class here at Mercy Baptist Church. My name is Robert Rathbone, and we're going to be in the third chapter of Joshua this morning. We're going to cover the miraculous way that God brought Israel across the Jordan River, and it being miraculous, it's actually very similar to the way that God brought, I'm fixing my phone here so we wouldn't be disturbed. It's very similar to the way that God brought Israel across the Red Sea. And as such, it served to be an intimidation factor to the nations in Canaan that would come, because they would later hear about the way that, some of them already heard about the way God brought Israel across the Red Sea. You can see that in Joshua 2:9, 9 and 10, when Rahab tells the spies that had come to Jericho that, we know how God brought you across, the Red Sea, and now we're afraid of you. And then later on, after the crossing of the Jordan in Joshua 5:1, the other nations in Canaan hear about it, and they, let me read that briefly to you. This is Joshua 5:1. It says, "And it came to pass when all the kings of the Amorites who were on the side of Jordan westward, and all the kings of the Canaanites, which were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of Jordan before the children of Israel until we were passed over, that their heart melted. Neither was there spirit in them anymore because of the children of Israel." So I'm trying not to get ahead of myself, but the Lord is showing His power. He demonstrated it in Egypt. He demonstrated it when they crossed the Red Sea. And now, today, as we look at it, He's going to demonstrate His power again as the children of Israel, as He brings the children of Israel across the Jordan River. So before I get too much more into it, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you again for your love and mercy and your grace, Father. Thank you, Lord, for saving our souls, Father. Thank you for giving us your word, Lord, that we can read and study and understand, Lord, more about you. So teach us, Father, this morning what you have for us here in this third chapter of Joshua, and use it to glorify yourself and help us to grow in our faith, Father. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Last week we were in chapter 1. God had told Joshua that it's time. Moses is dead. It's time for you to step up and take charge and take the children of Israel across the Jordan River into Canaan. In chapter 2, which our book has a skipping over, is when Joshua sent 2 spies on a reconnaissance mission to Jericho. And this apparently happened before the events of this, even sometime in the midst of chapter 1, apparently, because in chapter 1, Joshua tells the people in 3 days, get ready, because in 3 days, we're crossing the Jordan. Here in this chapter, we'll find out where it picks up, there's still 3 days. In Joshua 2, it takes multiple days for the spies to do their reconnaissance mission, make the trip to Jericho. They had to hide out for a few days, and then they came back. So apparently this happened before Joshua gave the command that, in 3 days we're crossing Jericho, or we're crossing the Jordan River. But while these spies were in Jericho, they meet Rahab the harlot. She protects them. She hides them, protects them from the authorities of the city, who are coming, who are looking for him to arrest him. And because she did that, they promised that her life would be spared when they came and took the city. So now we come to chapter 3, verse 1. And it says, "And Joshua rose early in the morning, and they removed from Shittim and came to Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over." So this is why, and I think I've seen other commentators say, these things are not necessarily in chronological order. Like when you watch a movie, sometimes you'll see they'll stop the story and they'll do a flashback to help explain what's happening right now in the story. You might could look at chapter 2 as sort of like that these things happen because you'll see more of it later on, because when they do take Jordan, Joshua commands, he says, go and save, bring out Rahab and her family that's in her house, and spare them while they destroy the rest of the city. All right, so here it says Joshua rose early in the morning, and this is apparently the morning after he gives the command in 3 days we're going to cross the Jordan. And it says, "And they removed from Shittim and came to Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over." So apparently what they did, Joshua says, in 3 days we're crossing Jordan. He has the camp move from where they were over next to Jordan, so that when the 3 days were expired, then they could just go right straight across. And so these are those 3 days that Joshua was talking about. So verse 2, it says, "And it came to pass after 3 days that the officers went through the host, and they commanded the people, saying, When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall remove from your place and go after it." All right, so that first line says, "And it came to pass after 3 days that the officers went through the host and commanded the people." So when the 3 days were expired, Joshua sent the officers of the people, those over, I guess, the individual tribes and the individual families and clans or whatever of the people. He sent them through the host to command the people to pass they didn't have cell phones where they could text everybody the message, or TVs where they could broadcast it, or loudspeakers where they could broadcast it. So they had to send people through the congregation to pass the message along. And so he gave them a command, and it says, saying, "When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests and the Levites bearing it." Now the ark of the covenant represented the presence of God, because he resided on, he told Moses, he said, "I will reside on the mercy seat there on top of the ark, and that's where I will commune with you." You can see that in Exodus 25, verses 21 and 22. But now Joshua is telling them, he's commanding that the priests are going to carry the ark. And so the command to the people was, look, when you see the ark and the priests are carrying it, he says, "Then ye shall remove from your place and go after it." They're to pack up their stuff, or probably because they know it's the third day and the 3 days is up, they're probably already packing up. But he said, remove from your place. In other words, just pick up everything that's yours and go after it, follow it. But there's some stipulations here. Verse 4, he says, "Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Come not near unto it, that ye may know the way by which ye must go, for ye have not passed this way heretofore." All right, so he's telling them, he says, you got to leave a gap. There's a space here between you. Don't just get right up behind the ark. You need to leave a gap there. He says 2,000 cubits. The cubits, cubit is measurement basically from a man's elbow to his tip of his finger. But of course, because everybody's different, some men have longer arms than others. The definition of a cubit kind of varies, but I think most commentators accept 18 inches as being, which is 50%. If you're measuring it in feet, it's you just add 50% to the number. So 2,000 cubits would be 3,000 feet, or as a lot of commentators would express it as 1,000 yards. But you have that big, huge gap there, which I got thinking about that. That's about like 10 football fields. And I'm thinking, why does he want that big of a gap between there? My first thought was, hey, it's the ark. It's holy. The ark was under strict rules about who could approach it, who could get close. Normally it stayed in the Holy of Holies, where the only person that ever saw it was the high priest, and he could only do that once a year, and even then it was obscured by incense. But so I thought maybe the Lord's making sure that they give it a wide berth, a huge gap, that way nobody would get close enough that they could be struck down dead because of invading God's holiness, or them being unclean, coming into contact with God's holiness. But he gives us a more practical answer here in this next line. He says, that ye may know the way that ye must go, for ye have not passed this way heretofore. I'm thinking that if this is the entire congregation of Israel, men, women, children, they probably number in the millions. And so that large of a group, if they're right up on the ark, then there's going to be a good portion of the people that can't see the ark, so they don't know which way to go. So he may have given that gap so that large of a group could follow and go in one direction, because the last thing he wanted, that the Lord wanted, Joshua wanted, was for the people to be wandering, each one finding their own way across the Jordan, because God had a plan. You're crossing the Jordan, and you're crossing here at this point, where I'm taking you across, with the ark. And so he's trying to, I guess, make this a unified thing. And he says here, that you may know the way that you must go, because you've not passed this way before. So God would be picking the appropriate place for them. I guess when the waters parted and there was the riverbed, there would be a level place instead of like a lot of riverbeds with rocks and things, that uneven ground make it difficult to pass. He's probably picking the ideal spot for them to cross. So God is saying, you need to follow my leadership, follow me in the as represented by the ark. All right, so verse 5, it says, and Joshua said unto the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. The word sanctify basically means to be set apart for the service of God. So he's saying, you need to consecrate yourself, be prepared, dedicate yourselves, and sanctify yourselves. In fact, the word holy and the word sanctified, if they're not very different forms of the same word, they are very closely related, because holiness, God is holy because he's different, he's unique, he's different from anything else. He is his own entity in a category by himself, you could say. And sanctification, and in fact holiness could be considered, you are set apart, where sanctification is the act of becoming set apart, where one's a noun or maybe an adjective, and then the other one's a verb. But here he's telling the people, he says, you need to sanctify yourselves. Why? Because tomorrow the Lord is going to will do wonders among you. He said, look, God's going to be doing a wonder, something that you would, basically it's a miracle. And so he said, look, if you need to sanctify yourself, be prepared, make yourself, in some senses you could say he's saying, make yourself worthy, although we could never be worthy of, we don't earn God's blessings or God's, if God chooses to do a miracle in our behalf, it's not because we've earned it, because we've did something to induce God. We didn't obligate God to do it for us. But we can put ourselves in a place where God is going to bless us, and we can remove ourselves from that place. So he's telling these people, you need to sanctify yourself, be ready, because God's going to do wonders, and it's possible that God may change his mind about doing that wonder if you are not properly prepared for it. And they would need, if they were going to cross the Jordan safely, they had to have God's help. All right, now our book skips to verse 14, verses 6 through 13. It says that the next day Joshua commands that the priests carry the ark and position themselves in front of the people. Then Joshua addresses the people and declares that they can be certain that God is going to... I lost my place here. Yeah, God's going to be faithful to help them take the land because of the demonstration of his power that they're about to witness. So verse 14, it says, and it came to pass when the people removed from their tents to pass over Jordan, and the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people. All right, now verses 14 through 16 are basically one long sentence that says, here's how it happened, and it's a progression of events. And these next two verses are 14 and 15 actually are saying, this happened and this happened, and because of those things happened, then this happened. And so it's not a complete sentence, so we kind of have to bear that in mind as we work our way through it. But it says, and it came to pass, in other words, he's saying, this is how things progressed, this is how things happened. He says, when the people removed from their tents to pass over Jordan, they've seen the ark, the priests are leading the way, and now the people are removing from their tents. They are, packing it up, and they're got all their stuff picked up and ready to go, and they're following the ark. It says, and the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people. So the priests are carrying the ark. They're leading away to the river Jordan, so they're heading out. Verse 15, it says, and as they that bear the ark were coming to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for the Jordan overfloweth all his banks at the time of harvest. All right, let's stop there. It says, and as they that bear the ark were coming to the Jordan, and notice it says, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped into the brim of the water. So you got the priests, the ark had the poles on either side, the staves, and so you had 4 priests, 2 in the back, actually, probably as heavy as it was, they probably had 2 on each pole, 1 on each end of the pole. They're carrying the ark to the river, and they are just stepping into the river. They are just getting their feet wet. This is amazing. I guess God's timing is the way He did this. It's not like they got up to their waist or up to their ankles, or possibly up to their ankles, but they weren't getting up here and they're like, okay, Lord, but. And then he gives a parenthetical here. It says, for Jordan overfloweth all his banks at the time of the harvest. And you see something in parentheses, they're giving you a little extra piece of information that's important for you to know. And so he says, for Jordan overfloweth the banks all the time of harvest. See, this was not the dry season when the Jordan River was at its shallowest. This was apparently in the time of harvest when the river had swollen due to it being the rainy season. The melting of the snows from nearby mountains had run down and filled up the tributaries, I guess, and into the Jordan River, and made this was, yeah, I guess in one sense, if he was going to cross the Jordan River, this was the worst time to do it because it was the deepest. It had overflowed its banks, so it's probably the widest. And yet, God chose this time to do it. You know, there's a lesson there. Many times we ask God, oh, Lord, help me get through this situation. Sometimes He chooses the worst time. If I was done it, I'd be like saying, Lord, you need to help me through this, and this is the time to do it right now when it's the best chance of success. But so many times the Lord chooses the the time of the worst chance of success, so when it succeeds, He's the one that did it. It wasn't just luck and happenstance, or wasn't your ability or the ability of someone else that was helping you. It was God that gets you through. And so God chooses the worst time, the most dangerous time of year, the hardest time, most difficult time to cross the Jordan to do this. And these priests are having to trust the Lord that, as they're walking into the river, I guess they have no idea at what point is the Lord going to actually start doing, because I don't know if these priests actually know what's going to happen. But they're walking by faith, saying, okay, Lord, Joshua said the Lord was going to do a wonder. What's He going to do? And they're walking through into the river, and they don't know when the Lord is going to take over and start doing His thing. And so I guess they didn't know how high was the water going to get before something happened. But here it says their feet were just dipped into the brim. They had just gotten their feet wet. And then verse 16, he says that all these things. Well, these three verses here, 14 through 16, they're like, when this happened and this happened, then this happened. And here's what it happened. Here's the then that happened. Verse 16, he says that the waters which came down from above stood and rose upon an heap, very far from the city of Adam, which is beside Zaratan. And those that came down from the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people passed over right against Jericho. So it says the waters which came down from above. That's not from above like what we think. It's basically from upstream. The waters that were flowing down. See, the Jordan River flows normally from north to south, and it flows right down through, actually it flows due south and runs into the Dead Sea. And so he's saying the waters which came down from above, so the waters north of where they were crossing, it says they stood and rose up upon a heap very far from the city of Adam that is beside Zaratan. Now, the exact location of the city of Adam, nobody really knows. It's some commentators put it as close as 15 miles north of the crossing, and others as far as 30 miles north of where they were crossing. And he says very far. This is very far from the city of Adam, so that puts the exact location where the water's heaped up as even more unknown, because we don't know if very far is very far north of the city of Adam, or is it very far south of this, like in between Adam and where they were crossing. We really don't know. But God, either way, however way, and it's possible, it depends on how the commentators translate it, I suppose. I got thinking about it's possible that the very far might be meaning very far from where Israel was at. The way they translate here is very far from the city of Adam. So, and I'm not qualified as a Hebrew translator to know which one's more likely. But the waters stood and rose up upon a heap. Now I can't imagine what that would look like. If you just had this like you had a mound of water, like it was like a mound of dirt or something, but God stopped the waters, kept them from flowing down Jordan as they would naturally do. And then it says, and those that came down toward the sea of the plain, those waters. You had the main river of Jordan. God stopped that up there, very far from the city of Adam. And this is in those, I'm going to insert the word waters, those waters that came down from the sea of the plain, toward the sea of the plain, even the the Salt Sea. Now the Salt Sea is what they called the Dead Sea, because one of the most prominent features of the Dead Sea is it's a very salty lake of water. Basically because all that water comes in and all the sediment and the minerals and everything, they have no place to go. So he says all those, these are the tributaries, not just the main river, but the tributaries that would be flowing into the Jordan River, maybe south of where the waters were heaped up, and they would still be more water coming down. The Lord was wise enough to cut those off. So he not only stopped the water from flowing down the Jordan River, he also stopped all the tributaries, and so that way there was no water at all coming down the Jordan River. And so it says, and the people passed over right against Jericho. So when the waters quit flowing down there, then they had a clear. They didn't have to wade water or tread water or swim, because I'm sure the water would have been over their heads. They says they passed right over against Jericho, and so apparently Jericho was on the other side of Jordan where they crossed, and so where they crossed, they could just go right straight on toward Jericho. So then verse 17 says, and the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all the Israelites passed over on dry ground until all the people were passed clean over Jordan. So the way this is being described, he says, okay, they all crossed over, and then he comes back and gives you a little more detail about how that happened. In fact, you get over into chapter 4, and there's more information there, things that happened before the event is finally concluded. But here it says, the priests that bear the ark of the covenant, they stood firm on dry ground in the midst of Jordan. In other words, they didn't just go across the Jordan and come out the other side and then the people were following. When they got in the middle of Jordan, they stopped and waited and let the people go on past them, because the water stopped flowing as soon as the ark basically was entering the Jordan. And so as soon as we'll see here in a minute, as soon as they leave the Jordan, that's when the waters come back. So in order to keep the waters from flowing, they had to stay there in Jordan, in the middle. And now let's look at this word dry ground here. The Hebrew word there for dry ground, I looked at how it is used in various places. I know we think of it when it says dry ground, it means dry ground. It means there's no moisture there. It's dusty, dry, that type of thing. But the Hebrew word there doesn't necessarily mean without moisture. It basically, it's used other places in the Bible basically to distinguish between what is normally underwater and what is normally not underwater. Like in Genesis, when God he gathered all the water together in one place into seas and lakes and whatever. And then he says, and let the dry land appear. This is land that was no longer underwater. In Haggai 2:6, here he says, "For thus saith the Lord of hosts, yet once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens, and the earth, and the sea, and the dry land." And dry land is the same Hebrew word for dry ground here. So it seems like he's distinguishing between what's normally underwater and what's normally not underwater, or what is underwater and what is not underwater. So when he says the priest stood firm on dry ground in the midst of Jordan, he may not necessarily meant that it was dry. Now God is supernaturally able to, he could have dried that, he could turn it into a concrete paved highway if he'd wanted to. But all I'm saying is the Hebrew word doesn't necessarily mean dry as in, there's no water there. Because even the dry ground, we live on dry ground, but like it is today, if it rains, it's going to be wet, but it's still considered dry ground because it's not underwater. It's not submerged, unless you have a flood or something. But so I don't know if the priests are standing there on a muddy ground or if they are standing on actual dry ground. All I know is God probably took away any impediment. If it was too marshy or muddy for them to get through, then God solved that problem. So however way God wanted to do it, that's all I'm saying is the Hebrew word doesn't necessarily mean dry as in no moisture. All right, so it says, "And the priests that bare the ark of the covenant stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan. They stood there in the middle, let the children of Israel pass by. And all the Israelites passed by all over on dry ground," same word, "until all the people were passed clean or completely over Jordan." So the priests held their position while the people walked by until the last one had gotten out. And then once they had once all the people had passed over Jordan and they're back on on the other side of the Jordan, then Joshua gives the priests the command for them to come out of the Jordan. And then the moment they did that, then the water started flowing normally. Joshua 4, this is the next chapter, verses 15 through 18 says, "And the Lord spake unto Joshua, saying, Command the priests that bear the ark of the testimony that they come up out of Jordan. Joshua therefore commanded the priests, saying, Come ye up out of the Jordan. And it came to pass that when the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord were come up out of the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests were lifted up unto the dry land." Well, normally they were already on dry land, and this is still the same Hebrew word for dry ground, dry land. But he's saying, once they stepped up out of what was normally underwater up onto the part that was normally not underwater, this is when it says, "Then that the waters of the Jordan returned unto their place and flowed over all his banks as they did before." So it was the presence of God in the Jordan is what prevented the waters from flowing. And I got to thinking about this, the timing of it, because it takes time, whether this place where the waters heaped up was 15 miles away or 30 miles away. God knew the timing of when those priests were going to put their feet in the water, when they got their feet wet, that he had probably already cut off the waters so that the remnants of that water flowed down past them, and then suddenly, they had the water was gone and they could go on into the Jordan. And so the Lord, obviously in his wisdom knew when he needed to cut off those waters so that the Jordan River would be dry by the time the priests, for the timing of it, that as soon as they put their feet in the water and got them wet, that's when the waters subsided and flowed on downstream and left them with a dry bed. All right, so that's all the verses that our book has for us in this for this lesson. Next week we're going to be in chapter 6, and we're going to be looking at the taking of Jericho. And God is still working miracles at that point as well, because He promised Israel. He said, "I'm going to help you. You know, I've given you this land," and He says, "I'm going to be with you to take the land."